Thank you all for being a part of our subscription and checking out this week's exclusive content video. We are going to cover decaf coffee. First and foremost, we're going to cover how that caffeine is actually removed with 3 processes. Now there are more than this, but we are just going to cover 3 today. The first one is CO2. So coffee is added to water that is warm, not incredibly hot like with the Swiss water process, but it is warm, and then it is pressurized with carbon dioxide. That carbon dioxide is what actually removes the caffeine from the coffee and puts it into the water. Then you have flavor that has also been removed into that water. The caffeine is removed from it, and then that is actually not true. Thank you guys for being a part of our subscription and checking out this week's exclusive content video. This week we are going to cover caffeine in the decaf version. You know? Okay. Thank you guys for being a part of our subscription and checking out this week's exclusive content video. This week we cover decaf coffee. First and foremost, we're going to cover 3 ways in which that caffeine is actually removed from the coffee itself. The first way is through CO2. Coffee is added to warm water and then is pressurized with CO2. That forces the caffeine into the water, and then that water is removed, and then you have decaf coffee. The next way, number 2, which is Storyline's preferred method, is the Swiss water process extraction for caffeine. Now, what it does is water is added to the coffee and it is very hot. That water actually removes all of the flavor and all of the caffeine into the water itself. That water is then removed from the coffee and the caffeine is pushed through a carbon filter, which removes the caffeine, and then you're left with just flavor water. That water is added back into the coffee, and this is how you get the Swiss water process. Now, I understand, and I had the same thought myself, doesn't that remove some of the flavor when you're putting it into the water? And actually, this is one of the most flavorful ways that you can actually get good decaf coffee. So, the third way, and the way that was used most commonly, is with chemicals. Now, that is not a preferred method just because of what it does to the coffee and the fact that you're actually using a chemical to remove the caffeine. But there's 2 different chemicals that are used to extract the caffeine from the coffee, and that's not a preferred method. Now, let's talk about some tips, tricks, and techniques when brewing decaf coffee. So, the first thing that I want to talk about is when caffeine is removed from coffee, it actually weakens the cell structure of the coffee. What this does is it is actually going to make it more brittle and more easily breaks down. So what happens when that occurs is the coffee will produce more fines. So when you're brewing it, you may want to take it just a touch coarser to reduce some of those fines that are produced, and that's because there's less moisture content. So when you're agitating your coffee, when you're swirling your coffee, you're not really going to want to do that with a decaf because it's going to clog up your paper filter. So take it just a step coarser, don't agitate your decaf coffee as much, and you'll have a more evenly extracted brew of your decaf coffee. Now the next thing that we want to talk about is the fact that it looks darker in color. However, that is not an indicator of the actual roast level of the coffee. So, decaf coffee looks much darker. It actually may be oily even sometimes, and that is not because your coffee was overly roasted. So for my roasters out there, it is an important note that you can't really base the roast level on color in this stance because it has no impact on flavor, even though it does look a lot darker. One of the last things we're going to talk about is decaf coffee has little to no astringency. Astringency is produced when channeling. So channeling is when water will take the path of least resistance through your coffee. Now, decaf coffee does not have much astringency, nor does it have much channeling, which is the way in which astringency is produced, and that's a good thing for espresso. Now, A note on this is espresso can be really tricky when it comes to decaf. That's the last thing we want to touch on, which is just something that I pulled from last week, but particular to decaf. How do you pull a good shot of espresso in decaf form? Now, let me tell you, I've had tons of trouble with decafs on espresso, and the unfortunate reality is you don't want to change anything. Use your same parameters, use your same dosage and everything else that you would normally use for a regular coffee, but you really have to be careful about what coffee you use in a decaf espresso selection. So make sure that that origin and that coffee that you are selecting for your decaf is really going to produce a good, well-balanced, good tasting espresso. Now, I know a lot of you guys are wondering this. Did you send me decaf coffee? I would not do that to you guys. I'm not that mean. I know you're all caffeine addicts. So, what coffee we sent you is a Uganda Natural. Now listen, this coffee is unreal. When we were roasting it, it was super tropical, super fruity, super sweet smelling. I was stoked on it. I did not know how good this coffee really was when I sourced it. Now, it's a tier 1 coffee, so it comes in at 90 or above in our cupping score, and it absolutely lives up to that. It is an incredible coffee. It's natural processed. It's a higher elevation coffee. It's grown at 1,900 meters above sea level, and it is super good. So I hope you guys enjoy the content this week, all about taking out the caff in your caffeine, and enjoy your coffee from Uganda. Hope you guys all have a great week.